This is one of the big ones, especially for Aboriginal astronomy.
We have our own Stonehenge, you know. That's amazing.
So if it goes back, let's say 10,000 years, that predates the Egyptians, pyramids, Stonehenge, all that stuff.
It's 6 p.m. in Sydney, and most people are heading for home now. But as the light fades, things are just coming to life at the old Sydney Observatory, overlooking the harbour.
What do you hope to see tonight?
Lots of stars, planets.
Planets. Which is your favourite planet?
Uranus.
Why?
Because it sounds funny.
Humankind has always been fascinated by the night sky.
Well, good evening, everyone. I'd like to welcome you to the oldest working observatory here in Australia. It's a prime location in the city.
But just how long ago did humans start to track the movements of the planets and the stars? Dwayne Hammaker is a student of something called archaeoastronomy at Sydney's Macquarie University. He is on a mission into the past.
If you go outside on a night like tonight, and you were to have a look up at the night sky, you'd be lucky if you could count a few dozen stars. The city lights pose a major problem. They really blind out everything that we want to see in the night sky. So you can imagine, a couple of hundred years ago, before there were Europeans here, on a crystal clear night, with a full view of the dome of the sky, you'd be able to count upwards of 4,000 stars. Absolutely amazing.
But it's not only light pollution that diminishes the study of the southern skies. It's now being realised that Australia's ancient Aboriginal people had a great knowledge of astronomy, which was virtually overlooked when white settlers took over 200 years ago, and much of it has been lost.
It was evening when the bird returned.
Yet tantalising traces survive.
When the child climbed onto the bird's back, the Gurri bird would fly to his hidden nest high up in the tallest tree in the Michael.
The tale of the mythical Gurri bird is being told in the observatory's Aboriginal Astronomy exhibition.
The great expanse of sparks and burning feathers left by the Gurri bird as he flew from Budaradala to the western lake remained in the sky and became Budenbil, the Milky Way.
Don't try and look at Aboriginal astronomy and compare it to white man's version of astronomy.
The exhibition was assembled by historian James Wilson Miller, an Aboriginal curator at Sydney's Powerhouse Museum.
Our Aboriginal astronomy is often associated with our oral creation stories, whereas the white man's astronomy is associated with telescopes and measurement and all the things from Leonardo da Vinci, Galileo and everybody that looked at the night skies, if you know what I mean.
But now comes a surprise, a discovery that could change our whole understanding of Aboriginal people and even of human development itself.
There is a stone arrangement in Victoria, about halfway between Melbourne and Geelong, called Wurdi Youang. There are lots of stone arrangements, but this is special, and it's a large standing stone arrangement, very similar to the ones you would see in Scotland, Ireland, and in England. It's egg-shaped. It's about 50 meters in diameter, with 3 large standing stones at one apex that mirror 3 mountains in the background. And at the apex at the other end, if you stand there and look down, the center of it, which is exactly east-west, you can see the equinox sitting over these 3 stones. And if you look down the other side, you see two rows that align to the solstices. It looks very similar to Stonehenge in some respects. So we've actually sort of labeled it as an Aboriginal Stonehenge.
An Aboriginal Stonehenge, aligned to the summer and winter solstices, the first of its kind to be found in Australia.
I saw the stone arrangement and I thought, wow, this is really amazing.
The questions and implications it raises are staggering. The site at Wurdi Youang is full of surprises and a mystery.
But the problem with a lot of the stone arrangements, and the same problem with Wurdi Youang, is there aren't any, or there are very few Aboriginal records in the literature, and nobody to tell us what they meant or what they were used for. So we've got to try to figure that out on our own. So does anybody have any questions? We got a few minutes. Yes?
What's on top of space?
What's on top of space?
Yeah.
Once we get out of our atmosphere, that's it. I've never had somebody ask me what's on top of space.
There are even harder questions to come. Could the stones at Wurdi Youang have the power to shatter some of the myths still held about Aboriginal people today, such as an inability to do mathematical calculations? In fact, did Aboriginal people chart the night skies long before Western astronomers? Did they keep accurate records and master the maths and geometry needed to make solstice plans?
It's a very complex puzzle that we've got to figure out.
The astronomical significance of Wurdi Youang was first seen by a local cultural historian called John Morrison, but his work had never received the credit it deserved, until now.
I heard this guy called John Morrison who's claiming that there are some alignments there, that if you stood in a particular place, you would see the sun setting on Midsummer's Day or Midwinter's Day in the Equinox. Well, if this is real, this is phenomenal.
Professor Ray Norris is a leading astrophysicist at the government CSIRO research organisation, and he is fascinated by Aboriginal astronomy. Norris has now confirmed Morrison's initial findings at Wurdi Youang, and with Dwayne Hamaker, are set for further research at the site. Comparisons with Stonehenge are irresistible.
So Stonehenge is a fantastic site. It's really changed our views of the way that Bronze Age society in Britain worked. Wurdi Youang, okay, it's not as big and impressive as Stonehenge, obviously, it's smaller stones and so on, but it looks like it's the same sort of process. People are starting to get interested in the way the sky works. So I think it potentially changes our view of how traditional Aboriginal cultures worked.
Does this have significance for the study of human history?
I think so, yeah. It shows that people are getting interested in the sun and the moon, and that tells us about the way that human thought develops.
A rethink of our human history. But of course the big question now is, when were the stones laid? Could Australia's Stonehenge be older than England's Stonehenge? And that could spark a debate as fierce as the Ashes cricket contest. James Wilson Miller is keeping an open mind.
Some of the archaeological findings in and around the state of Victoria have taken Aboriginal people back, well over 15,000, 20,000 years. We've had archaeological digs that have found evidence that Aboriginal people have been here for 60,000 years. There's a lot of evidence that it could be older than your Stonehenge, but I'm not going to be so gullible as to qualify that, mate. I'll just sit back and wait for your archaeo-astronomers to come up with a date.
But there's an even grander claim that Norris is exploring.
It's plausible because people have been in this country for 50,000 years. So if it goes back, let's say 10,000 years, that predates the Egyptians, the pyramids, Stonehenge, all that stuff. And so that would indeed make them the world's first astronomers.
Now, that's probably all academic, if you know what I mean. But as far as the Aboriginal people believe that, we've been here since the dreaming, and the dreaming is infinite to us.
This may predate Stonehenge for all we know. We don't know at this point. So further research would be to do some geophysical archaeology to see how old the stone arrangement is.
How do you do that?
Well, that's notoriously difficult. One of the techniques that was actually used at Stonehenge was to take a sample of soil from underneath one of the stones that may have a twig or a leaf or something like that in it and radiocarbon date that. And that was one way that they were able to determine at least one line of evidence they had for gathering an age of Stonehenge. That may be possible here, I'm not sure. Being an Aboriginal site, you don't want to go in, you don't want to disturb it. So it's very difficult to be able to date these types of sites. And we don't have any contact with any Aboriginal elders in the area that know anything about it as well.
I tracked down Wurdi Youang's traditional owners, Brian Powell and Bonnie Fagan. They are elders of the local Wurdi people. The site itself is owned by the Wurdi People's Co-op. Brian Powell and Co-op head Trevor Edwards say the traditional knowledge concerning the site has been lost through the banning of their language and the government's removal of Aboriginal children in the 20th century. Thousands of years of knowledge gone in a matter of decades. The challenge now, it seems, is for the Aboriginal and scientific communities to share what they do know and just maybe work out a little bit more of this stone puzzle. the effects could be far-reaching.
It had been assumed by a lot of people that Aboriginal people, or by a lot of mainstream Australians, that Aboriginal people were primitive or stupid or didn't make measurements, didn't record things. And all of the evidence from the research that we're conducting is showing that to be exactly opposite. We're finding that Indigenous people certainly had a very good understanding of astronomy.
The moon is called Yanada. New moon is Baragai. The sun is going. Stars are Birong. So falling star, a singular, is the Daraga. Falling star plurals are Mumulyu. So these names, the sky was Bara. The Milky Way was Warrigal.
By adopting a hard scientific approach, Norris says they are finding intriguing evidence of scientific breakthroughs in ancient Aboriginal songs and ceremonies.
We find encoded in these songs explanation of why eclipses happen. It wasn't about balls of flame going out, it was about one body moving in front of the other. So we have these traditional Aboriginal stories about an eclipse being caused by the sun woman and the moon man making love. And when they make love, the body of one covers the other. So this is exactly the same as the modern scientific explanation. This is a giant intellectual leap.
And there are other examples. Back at the observatory, the dome is opening for one of the highlights of the night, a chance to peer through an old telescope.
Okay, everyone, and welcome to the South Dome Telescope. This is the largest, oldest, still functioning telescope of its kind here in Australia. It was built in 1874 to observe the transit of Venus. How old does that make it this year? 1874? You guys know math, right? The adults are free to think too. Go on.
In fact, since ancient times, the complex gyrations of Venus, following its 4 different cycles every 8 years, have been recorded by the Yolngu people to plan their morning star ceremony in the Northern Territory. When he was there, Norris found an ancient mathematical system was being used. And there's a bit of the dreaming in all of us.
I can see number 6.
That's the interesting thing about the night sky, is if you have a look, it's sort of like seeing shapes in clouds, right? It's a really interesting thing to go outside on your own and try to make your own constellations.
Even more mysterious for the astronomers is how the same stars were picked to create the same mythological characters by the ancient Greeks and the Aborigines, people separated by thousands of miles and thousands of years.
It is a very large and potentially complex subject, and I suspect we're only scratching the surface.
Can Wurdi Youang help to unlock some of these ancient secrets? Professor Norris has run into some unexpected obstacles.
How do your science colleagues respond to this?
I think some view it with suspicion. This isn't real science.
If you did face criticism, you don't feel at all intimidated by...
Sometimes I feel intimidated. But clearly, yeah, that goes for the territory. Clearly, you've got to be able to stand up and say what you believe in, even if people disagree with you. And I've actually had people saying to me, this is stupid. Aboriginal people don't do stuff like that. Well, how do you know they don't do stuff like that? Yeah, even now, actually, in modern Australian society, very nice people who you certainly wouldn't describe as racist, but there's this baggage that we carry around in our culture, these preconceptions.
I think with all science, there is always resistance to something as significant as this. There will be those who will run with it and say this is the most exciting thing that's happened for a very long time, and it's tangible, it's going to break new ground. And there's always, in everything, going to be the people say, my job here is to disprove this.
It's an attitude known only too well to Janet Mooney, the Aboriginal head of Koori Studies at Sydney University. Mooney teaches Aboriginal culture there to student teachers. Now she wants to get the story of Wurdi Youang into mainstream Australian education.
This discovery has huge significance for understanding the amazing ability of this culture that is maligned. It's got the potential, I guess, to change the attitude of kids in classrooms, which is where I'm coming from, where a teacher can say, all right, now let's have a look at the stars, let's have a look at astronomy. And we can now have an Aboriginal perspective that says, gee, look at this. Aboriginal people knew about this before Europe did. So looking at something like saying, wow, we have our own Stonehenge, you know, that's amazing.
Wurdi Youang has a deeply personal meaning for her.
I think it'll make not only me as an Aboriginal person, but a lot of Aboriginal people around Australia very proud, extremely proud.
You're going to use it?
Oh yes, as soon as I can, I'll be passing this on to our staff so they can actually include it in their teaching.
Can Wurdi Youang show the way for a new generation to reach for the stars? And how many other sites of astronomical significance are out there, waiting to be rediscovered? The hunt is now on.